We added Lyra to your offshore accounts because family shares everything, Vesper. Do not be so greedy with your $850,000 portfolio. Your sister deserves a head start in life, and you have more than enough. Those were the exact words my mother, Odelia, said to me. She delivered that agonizing sentence with a sickly sweet smile, entirely convinced that she had just legally robbed me blind. She honestly thought she had successfully handed my entire life savings over to my manipulative younger sister. The sheer audacity of her entitlement felt like a physical knife twisting in my stomach. They believed they had outsmarted me. But what Odelia and Lyra did not know was that I had received a biometric security alert the exact moment they tried to bypass the authorization protocols. I did not argue with them over the phone. I did not shed a single tear of frustration. I simply logged into my private terminal and drained every single penny from those offshore accounts. I transferred the entire $850,000 into an untraceable domestic trust in a matter of seconds. I left exactly $2.50 in the account, just so they would have something to look at when their login finally went through. That was the defining moment when I realized my family was not just toxic. They were a financial parasite, and they were actively trying to bleed me dry. My name is Vesper. I am a corporate restructuring director. My entire career revolves around walking into failing, chaotic companies and ruthlessly cleaning up their catastrophic messes. I am the person who fires incompetent executives, liquidates useless assets, and builds impenetrable structural boundaries to save the core business. I spend my days operating on pure logic and cold, hard facts. But for 34 years, I had completely failed to apply that same ruthless logic to my own family. I was the designated scapegoat. I was the invisible ATM they only acknowledged when they needed someone to fund their delusions. After the offshore account incident with Lyra, something inside me finally snapped permanently. I took the money I had rescued from their greedy hands, combined it with my massive corporate bonuses, and disappeared. I bought a $3 million custom-built mansion on the rugged coastline of Oregon. I paid for it entirely in cash. I made absolutely sure the deed was locked down under a blind trust so no one could easily trace it back to my name. The mansion was an architectural masterpiece perched on a high cliff overlooking the violent, crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean. It was heavily fortified with high-tech biometric security gates and reinforced steel doors. It did not just look like a home. It looked like a modern fortress. For the first time in my life, I stood on my expansive glass balcony and breathed in the sharp, salty sea air without feeling the crushing weight of family expectations. The silence was intoxicating. I listened to the waves smashing against the jagged rocks far below. I finally had a sanctuary. I had built a fortress where their toxic reach could not suffocate me anymore. Or so I foolishly thought. I had severely underestimated the sheer, terrifying delusion of my golden child brother, Kale. Because at exactly 11:42 at night, on my very first evening in my new home, the secure private phone line that I only gave out for extreme medical emergencies started ringing. I stared at the glowing caller ID in the dark living room, my blood running completely cold. It was him. How did he even get this number? How did he know where I was? I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the receiver. I had no idea that answering that call would force me to initiate the most brutal restructuring project of my entire life. "Hello, Vesper," Kale said. His voice was dripping with that insufferable, unearned arrogance he always carried like a badge of honor. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not apologize for calling in the middle of the night. "I am just calling to give you a heads up," Kale continued smoothly. "Mom, Dad, and I have the moving truck packed and ready to go. We are driving up the coast right now. We will be arriving tomorrow morning to take over the property." I stood frozen in the middle of my massive living room, staring blankly at the shadows dancing across the hardwood floor. My brain completely short-circuited trying to process his words. "Take over," I whispered. "What on earth are you talking about, Kale?" He let out a sharp, condescending laugh that grated against my ears. "Do not play dumb with me, Vesper. We know you bought that ridiculous Cliffside mansion. Dad already handled all the necessary paperwork on our end. We are moving in." I am taking the master bedroom suite because the natural lighting is perfect for my day trading studio. You can clear out the guest house by the garage for yourself. If you do not like the new arrangement, you can pack your bags and move back to the city. The absolute insanity of his demands echoed in the massive, empty room. My hands clenched into tight fists at my sides. He was ordering me out of my own $3 million home. He honestly believed he could just claim the master suite of a house I bought with cash I earned through my own blood, sweat, and tears. "Cale, you are out of your mind," I said, forcing my voice to remain deadpan and level. "You are not moving in here. I will not allow you or anyone else through the front gate." "Dad transferred the deed, Vesper." Cale snapped, his tones suddenly turning vicious. "We have legal residency. We are taking over, and there is nothing your selfish, greedy little mind can do to stop us. Have some coffee ready when we pull up." He hung up the phone. The dial tone buzzed loudly in my ear. He thought my absolute silence on the line was a sign of submission. He thought I was still that same terrified, obedient little girl who used to surrender her allowance just to keep the peace in the house. He did not realize it was the silence of an apex predator calculating its next strike. I did not panic. I did not cry and beg the universe for mercy. My corporate crisis management training kicked in instantly, flooding my system with a strange, icy calm. When a hostile takeover threatens your company, you do not sit down and weep. You assess the threat. You gather your operational resources. You execute a defensive strategy that entirely annihilates the opposition. They were not my family anymore. They were a severe liability that needed to be permanently liquidated. But to truly understand why I did not immediately call him back and warn him about the legal hellfire I was about to unleash, you have to know exactly what they did to me. You have to understand the history of their theft. Because this was not the first time they tried to claim my property as their own. As I stood in the dark, my mind immediately began constructing a mental museum of all my past pain. I remembered the first exhibit perfectly. I was 12 years old. I had spent an entire year mowing lawns and washing neighbors' cars to save up for a brand new, bright red mountain bike. I loved that bicycle more than anything in the world. 3 weeks after I bought it, I woke up to find the garage empty. Thaddeus, my father, was sitting at the kitchen table calmly reading the morning paper. "I sold your little toy," Thaddeus had said without even looking up at me. "Cale needed a new laptop for his gaming tournaments. Family shares their resources, Vesper. You can just walk to school." The second exhibit in my museum of pain was much more expensive. I was 25, working 80-hour weeks as a junior analyst, barely sleeping, surviving on cheap instant noodles. Cale, completely convinced he was a genius entrepreneur, maxed out multiple credit cards to fund a spectacular failure of a drop-shipping business. He racked up $20,000 in high-interest debt. The collection agencies started calling the house non-stop. Odelia showed up at my tiny, cramped apartment in the middle of a torrential rainstorm. She threw herself onto my cheap sofa and sobbed hysterically. "They are going to ruin his future, Vesper," she wailed, clutching her chest. "You have to pay it off for him. If you do not help your brother, I will never forgive you." I foolishly drained my meager emergency savings and paid off his $20,000 mistake. Cale did not even say thank you. He just bought a new designer watch the very next week to celebrate his fresh start. But the final exhibit, the ultimate betrayal, was the offshore account incident. That was the catalyst that brought me to this Cliffside fortress. I had spent years carefully building an investment portfolio, sheltering $850,000 in a secure offshore account. It was my retirement fund. It was my ultimate safety net. Somehow, Odelia found a copy of an old, heavily outdated power of attorney form from when I was hospitalized in college. She marched into a local branch, cried tears of maternal concern to a sympathetic bank manager, and used that invalid document to add Lyra's name to my accounts. "We added Lyra so she can access your portfolio," Odelia had told me on the phone, sounding incredibly proud of her own deceit. "She wants to start a luxury lifestyle blog, and she needs seed money." They were going to steal nearly $1 million from me to fund a fake internet life for my sister. But they were incredibly stupid. They did not understand modern banking security. The moment Lyra's name was flagged in the system, my phone received a critical authorization alert. I immediately froze the accounts on their end. Then I systematically drained the $850,000, leaving them with exactly $2.50. When Lyra finally tried to log in to steal my life savings, she was met with a balance that could not even buy her a cheap cup of gas station coffee. That money bought this mansion. And now, they were trying to steal the house itself. They thought they could hijack my physical property just like they tried to hijack my digital funds. But they were about to step into a massive legal trap they had carelessly built for themselves. I walked over to the massive kitchen island, turned on the sleek overhead lights, and opened my laptop. I did not need to cry. I needed facts. I needed absolute, verifiable data to crush whatever delusional legal play Thaddeus thought he had arranged. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person who could help me navigate this incoming disaster. Veda. Veda was the ruthless, brilliant real estate attorney who had handled the closing of my mansion just a few weeks prior. She was cold, highly analytical, and possessed a terrifyingly aggressive demeanor in a courtroom. She answered on the second ring, despite it being well past midnight. "Vesper," Veda said, her voice crisp and entirely awake. "Tell me this is a real estate emergency and not just a late-night panic attack." "My family is arriving tomorrow morning with a moving truck," I said flatly. "My brother Cale claims my father transferred the deed of the Oregon property to them. He says they are moving in and establishing permanent residency." I heard the distinct sound of Veda aggressively typing on her mechanical keyboard. "Let me be perfectly clear with you right now," Veda ordered. "Do not let them bring a single cardboard box onto your driveway. Do not let them use your bathroom. If they manage to establish physical residency, the eviction process in this state will drag on for 6 agonizing months." "I know," I replied. "But Thaddeus cannot magically transfer a deed that is locked in a blind trust. What exactly are they trying to pull?" "Give me 2 minutes," Veda muttered. The rapid clicking of her keyboard filled the silence. I stared out the window into the pitch-black night, waiting. Then, Veda's typing suddenly stopped. A long, heavy breath escaped her lips. "Vesper," Veda said, her voice dropping an octave. "Your brother is not just trying to sleep in your guest room. I just ran a public records sweep on your property address. Check your secure email right now." My phone buzzed with a notification. I opened the encrypted email from Veda and clicked the first link she sent. It routed me directly to the Oregon Secretary of State's official business registry database. My eyes scanned the digital document, and a cold shockwave rolled down my spine. Cale had registered a domestic limited liability company. The company was named Coastal Elite Holdings, LLC. The principal office address listed on the official state filing was the exact address of my new mansion. The registered agent was Cale. He was actively masquerading as a high-rolling real estate tycoon using my home as his corporate headquarters. "Look at the second link," Veda commanded. I clicked the next URL. It opened a page on a highly exclusive, ultra-luxury vacation rental platform. There, under the official banner of Coastal Elite Holdings, LLC, was a breathtaking listing for a private Cliffside retreat. The photos were stolen directly from the original real estate listing I had browsed when buying the house. The host was listed as Cale. I scrolled down to the booking calendar on the right side of the page. Almost every single weekend for the next 8 months was blocked out in solid red. "He is taking bookings," I whispered, feeling genuinely nauseous. "He is actively renting out your property to strangers," Veda confirmed. "Based on the required upfront payment rules for this specific luxury tier, I estimate Cale has already collected roughly $45,000 in booking deposits." $45,000. He was selling an illusion. He was defrauding innocent families looking for a vacation by promising them access to a house he did not own. Taking those deposits was bad enough. It was theft on a massive scale. But when Veda ran a hard credit check on my identity, the blood truly froze in my veins. "Vesper, it gets substantially worse," Veda warned, her tone shifting from professional concern to sheer legal outrage. "I just triggered an emergency soft pull through my firm's commercial credit monitoring system. Open your banking application and check your pending alerts." I switched apps with trembling fingers. A bright red notification glared back at me from the screen. It was a commercial credit inquiry from a major national bank. The application was for a massive business credit line to fund Coastal Elite Holdings LLC. The requested amount was $150,000. And right there, clearly listed under the primary financial guarantor section, was my full legal name. Cale had forged my digital signature. He had stolen my financial identity to secure a $150,000 loan for his fake luxury rental empire. He planned to move his entire life into my house, use my pristine credit score to fund his lavish lifestyle, and leave me holding the bag when the entire scam inevitably collapsed. This is no longer a simple family dispute over boundaries, Veda stated coldly. This is massive commercial fraud. This is felony identity theft. If he defaults on this fraudulent loan, the bank will put a devastating lien on your property. They will destroy the financial stability you have spent your entire adult life building. The final, lingering threads of guilt I had carried for my family evaporated into thin air. The little voice in my head that always sounded like Odelia, begging me to be a good and forgiving daughter, died instantly. I did not feel sad. I did not feel heartbroken. I felt a terrifying, white-hot fury consuming every cell in my body. My family had officially become a catastrophic liability. And in my line of work, liabilities get liquidated. What is our immediate legal strategy? I asked Veda. My voice was completely devoid of any human emotion. We go to absolute war, Veda replied without a second of hesitation. I am drafting the official fraud reports for the federal credit bureaus to permanently freeze that loan application. I will contact the luxury rental platform directly with a massive cease and desist order and a certified copy of your deed. But tomorrow morning, you're going to have a very aggressive physical problem standing on your front driveway. You need local law enforcement present before they arrive. Will the police actually show up for a civil property dispute? I asked. You are not calling to report a civil property dispute, Vesper, Veda corrected me sharply. You are calling dispatch to report an impending trespassing incident directly connected to an active wire fraud and identity theft investigation. I will be at your front gate at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning. Do not sleep. Fortify your perimeter. She hung up the phone. I looked around the beautiful, silent kitchen. They wanted to steal my hard-earned peace. They wanted to chain me to their endless cycle of debt and manipulation. I had exactly 10 hours before they arrived. I was not going to just lock the front doors and hide in my bedroom. I was going to build a brutal legal guillotine. The digital clock on the oven display read 2:15 in the morning. I had absolutely no time for exhaustion. I walked into the garage, grabbed my heavy emergency toolkit, and began the fortification process. My first phone call was to a premium 24-hour emergency locksmith located in the nearest coastal town. I willingly paid a massive, exorbitant premium for the middle-of-the-night service call. When the sleepy locksmith finally arrived in a battered white van, I instructed him to completely replace every single exterior deadbolt on the property. We swapped the standard locks for heavy-duty, commercial-grade smart locks. The loud, metallic clunk of the new deadbolt sliding firmly into place was the most comforting sound I had heard all year. While the locksmith was busy drilling metal on the front porch, I was inside setting up the digital perimeter defense. I unboxed the high-definition AI security cameras I had purchased during the move but had not yet found the time to install. I mounted the first camera directly above the main entrance, angling the lens to capture the entire sweeping driveway. I mounted a second camera near the heavy side gate and a third overlooking the glass balcony facing the ocean. I synced all the feeds directly to my secure tablet. I ensured the audio recording feature was active, tested, and crystal clear. I wanted every single threat, every manufactured lie, and every aggressive demand permanently caught on digital tape. At 3:30 in the morning, I sat back down at the kitchen island and dialed the county sheriff's non-emergency dispatch line. A tired-sounding dispatcher answered the call. "My name is Vesper," I said, maintaining my absolute professional crisis management tone. "I am calling to report a planned trespassing and potential breach of the peace at my residence scheduled for tomorrow morning. "Ma'am, if this is a domestic property dispute, you will need to handle it in civil court," the dispatcher replied, reciting the standard unhelpful protocol. "It is not a civil dispute," I countered smoothly. 3 individuals have explicitly stated their intent to force entry into my home with a commercial moving truck. Furthermore, this incident is directly connected to an active felony identity theft and commercial fraud case. The primary suspect has fraudulently applied for a $150,000 loan using my name without authorization. They intend to physically occupy the premises to leverage the property and continue their financial crimes. That immediately got her attention. I could hear her typing furiously in the background. I provided Cale's name, Thaddeus's name, and the exact time they promised to arrive at my gate. Given the documented threats and the severity of the fraud allegations, I will flag this immediately for the morning patrol, the dispatcher said, her tones suddenly razor-sharp. We will have units holding position in the area. Keep your doors locked and call 911 the exact second they step onto your property. By 5 o'clock in the morning, my house was an impenetrable fortress. I brewed a massive pot of strong black coffee and set up my command center directly on the kitchen island. I needed this execution to be absolutely flawless. I took 3 pristine plastic folders from my home office supplies. A red folder, a blue folder, a black folder. In the red folder, I placed the hard, undeniable evidence of my ownership. The certified deed, the property tax records, and the comprehensive home insurance policy. In the blue folder, I placed the devastating evidence of Cale's fraud. The state registration for Coastal Elite Holdings LLC. The screenshots of the luxury rental listings proving he stole $45,000 from innocent people. The printed alert from the credit bureau detailing the $150,000 loan application. In the black folder, I placed my own personal history of victimization. I had spent an hour downloading and printing 10 years of my personal bank statements. I used a bright yellow marker to highlight every single wire transfer, every cleared check, and every desperate emergency payment I had ever made to Thaddeus, Odelia, and Cale. The grand total was a sickening, infuriating number. I wanted it ready for the final blow. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, a sleek black SUV pulled up to my security gate. Veda stepped out wearing a sharp, tailored gray suit and carrying a heavy leather briefcase. She looked like a corporate assassin ready to dismantle an entire company. I buzzed her in through the gate. She walked straight into the kitchen, took one long look at the live security monitors and my color-coded evidence folders, and offered a grim, approving smile. "You really do not mess around when you restructure, do you, Vesper?" Veda asked. "Not anymore," I replied, handing her a steaming mug of coffee. We sat in total silence as the morning sun climbed higher into the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across my driveway. The tension in the house was so thick it was suffocating. At exactly 9:40, my phone vibrated aggressively on the marble counter. It was a text message from Cale. "Almost there. Hope the coffee is hot. Tell the movers where to park." I did not reply. I just stared at the live security camera monitor. At 9:45, exactly on schedule, the massive, imposing grille of a commercial moving truck turned onto my private road. Behind it, a familiar silver SUV followed closely. "Showtime," Veda said quietly. I picked up my phone and dialed the sheriff's dispatch. The war had officially begun. If you are enjoying this story so far, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Please leave a comment with the name of the city that you are currently living in. Every single comment helps the video reach a much wider audience, and I appreciate your support so much. I stood in the grand entryway of my home, clutching the edge of my tablet. My eyes were completely glued to the live security feed. The heavy, groaning sound of the commercial moving truck's air brakes hissed loudly over the rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves below. The truck ground to a halt right in the middle of my pristine circular driveway, intentionally blocking the path to the main road. The silver SUV parked aggressively right behind it, kicking up a cloud of white gravel dust. For a moment, nobody moved. The morning air was thick with coastal mist, giving the entire scene a surreal, cinematic quality. Then, the driver's side door of the SUV swung open. Thaddeus stepped out first. He was wearing a crisp, tailored button-down shirt and expensive slacks. He placed his hands on his hips and slowly looked around the property. He was not looking at my home like a proud father visiting his daughter's new accomplishment. He was surveying the land like a conquering king inspecting his newly acquired territory. He nodded in deep approval at the modern architecture and the reinforced steel security gates. He was already taking absolute ownership of my sanctuary in his mind. A few seconds later, the passenger door opened. Cale jumped out onto the gravel. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive designer leather jacket and a pair of dark aviator sunglasses. I knew for an absolute fact that he had purchased that jacket using a high-limit credit card I was still actively paying off. He whistled loudly at the sheer size of the mansion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy ring of brass keys, spinning them arrogantly around his index finger. He looked incredibly smug. He was completely unaware that those old keys were entirely useless against the commercial-grade smart locks I had installed just 6 hours ago. Finally, the rear door of the SUV opened. Odelia emerged carefully. She was carrying a massive, ridiculously ornate potted orchid with both hands. She adjusted her facial expression instantly, shifting into a mask of sweet, innocent, maternal sacrifice. That orchid was her ultimate prop. It was the physical peace offering she planned to use later to tell all our relatives how cruel and heartless I was for rejecting her unconditional love. 2 burly men in matching uniforms climbed out of the moving truck. They lowered the heavy hydraulic ramp with a loud metallic crash and stood by, waiting for instructions. I glanced back over my shoulder at Veda. She was standing perfectly still in the shadows of the living room hallway. She was leaning casually against the wall with her arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes were locked entirely on the heavy wooden front door. I heard the distinct sound of footsteps crunching aggressively on the gravel, marching straight toward my front porch. The high-definition security camera audio picked up their conversation with crystal-clear precision. "This place is absolutely massive," Cale said, his voice echoing loudly. "I am definitely taking the master suite upstairs. The natural lighting through those floor-to-ceiling windows is going to be perfect for my video calls with investors." "We will see about that," Thaddeus replied gruffly, his authoritative tone cutting through the cold morning air. "Your mother and I are going to need the primary space on the ground floor because of her knees. Vesper can just clear out that tiny guest room near the garage and set up her little home office in there." They were already aggressively carving up my entire life before they had even crossed the threshold. They were dividing my property like spoils of war. Cale confidently stepped up to the heavy, reinforced wooden front door. He did not knock. He did not ring the doorbell. He simply jammed one of the old brass keys directly into the deadbolt. The key did not fit. He frowned deeply, pulling his designer sunglasses down the bridge of his nose. He jiggled the key violently and tried to force the metal to turn. It scraped loudly and uselessly against the new high-security internal mechanism. He pulled it out, stared at it in confusion, and tried a second key. Nothing happened. "What exactly is the hold-up?" Thaddeus demanded, stepping heavily up onto the concrete porch. "The stupid lock is stuck," Cale muttered in extreme frustration. He raised his right fist and pounded aggressively on the solid wood. "Vesper," Cale shouted, his voice echoing sharply against the stone exterior of the house. "Open the door right now. The movers are charging us by the hour. Get out here and let us in." I took a very slow, deep breath, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. I reached out with a perfectly steady hand. I slowly unlocked the deadbolt, but I kept the heavy steel security chain firmly attached across the gap. I pulled the door open just a few inches. I looked at the 3 of them through the narrow opening. "You were explicitly told not to come here," I said. My voice was eerily calm, completely devoid of any emotion. Odelia immediately lifted the heavy potted orchid toward the gap in the door. She flashed her best, most deeply wounded smile. "Vesper, honey, please do not be so silly," Odelia cooed softly. We brought you a beautiful housewarming gift for the foyer. Now, unchain the door and let us inside before the neighbors see you acting like a difficult child. There are no neighbors for 3 miles, Odelia, I replied flatly. And you are criminally trespassing on my private property. Thaddeus pushed aggressively past Cale, his face instantly darkening with severe anger. His calm, authoritative persona was slipping away rapidly. I have had enough of this childish theater, Vesper, Thaddeus barked loudly. Open this damn door right now. We have an entire truck to unload, and I will not stand out here in the freezing cold negotiating with my own ungrateful daughter. I did not move a single inch. I did not flinch at his raised voice. I just stared dead into his eyes. Open the door, Cale yelled, stepping aggressively forward and slamming his hand against the wood. I reached up. I slowly unhooked the heavy steel security chain. I grabbed the iron handle and swung the door completely open. Cale immediately took a heavy step forward into the foyer. A massively triumphant smirk appeared on his face. He truly believed he had broken me just by raising his voice. But his arrogant smirk vanished instantly. He froze dead in his tracks. His eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated terror behind his expensive sunglasses. Standing directly behind me, stepping out from the shadows of the hallway so their silver badges caught the morning sunlight, were Sheriff Evander and a heavily armed deputy. They had arrived silently through the rear coastal access road 20 minutes earlier. They were fully uniformed. Their hands were resting casually but firmly near their utility belts. Their expressions were completely unreadable, radiating pure authority. The silence that suddenly fell over the front porch was absolute. It was deafening. Odelia slowly lowered the potted orchid, her mouth falling wide open in total shock. Cale actually took a stumbling step backward, nearly tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. Thaddeus completely froze. The color drained entirely from his face as he stared blankly at the 2 armed law enforcement officers standing inside my living room. What is this? Cale stammered nervously. His arrogant, booming voice suddenly sounded incredibly small and weak. I looked Cale dead in the eye, finally letting a cold, calculated smile spread across my face. This is the exact welcome you earned, I said quietly. Sheriff Evander took a heavy step forward. He positioned his large frame squarely between my family and the entrance to my home. He did not unholster his weapon, but his physical posture was completely unmistakable. He was an immovable concrete wall they were never going to cross. What exactly seems to be the problem out here? Sheriff Evander asked. His voice was incredibly deep and commanded immediate compliance. Thaddeus recovered from his initial state of shock much faster than the others. He immediately puffed out his chest, desperately trying to project the toxic dominance he had used to control our entire family for decades. There is absolutely no problem here, officer, Thaddeus said smoothly. He shot me a look of pure, venomous hatred. My daughter is just having a minor mental breakdown. We are moving our belongings into this house today. We have a legal, documented right to occupy this property, and I would highly appreciate it if you stepped aside so these paid movers can do their jobs. You were explicitly informed in writing that you are trespassing, the deputy chimed in. The deputy pulled a small black notepad from his breast pocket. The legal homeowner, Vesper, filed a formal complaint early this morning regarding documented threats to aggressively occupy this residence against her explicit refusal. She cannot refuse us, Thaddeus snapped, his thin patience completely wearing out. I am her father. And much more importantly, I have the official legal paperwork to prove our residency right here. Thaddeus reached into the interior pocket of his tailored jacket. He pulled out a thick, brown manila envelope. He opened it with greatly exaggerated slowness, pulling out a multi-page document. He held it out towards Sheriff Evander like a winning lottery ticket. This is a 10-year residential occupancy agreement, Thaddeus declared very loudly. He projected his voice to make absolutely sure the 2 movers standing near the truck could hear him. It grants my wife, my son, and myself full, unmitigated rights to live on this property. It was officially signed by Vesper 3 months ago, well before the final closing date, in exchange for major family financial consideration. I looked down at the pristine white papers in his shaking hand. I had never seen those documents before in my entire life. The sheer, breathtaking delusion required to forge a legal document and hand it directly to a sworn police officer was staggering. Before I could even open my mouth to speak, Veda stepped out from the hallway. She walked directly into the bright morning sunlight. She was holding her tablet loosely at her side and looked completely and utterly unimpressed. "May I please see that document, sir?" Veda asked. Her voice sliced through the heavy tension on the porch like a freshly sharpened blade. Thaddeus scowled deeply at her. "Who the hell are you?" Thaddeus demanded. "This is a private family matter. I am Veda, the retained real estate and corporate attorney representing the sole legal owner of this property," she replied smoothly. "And it completely ceased to be a private family matter the exact moment you handed a potentially forged legal instrument to a sworn law enforcement officer. Now, may I see the document, or do you want to officially withdraw it from the police record right now?" Thaddeus sneered fiercely. He shoved the document aggressively towards Sheriff Evander instead. "I am not showing my private lease to some ambulance chaser," Thaddeus spat. Sheriff Evander took the heavy document. He scanned the very first page and then deliberately held it out so Veda could carefully inspect it without physically taking it from police custody. I leaned in closely to look at it as well. There, right on the final page, was a signature that was supposed to be mine. It looked exactly like a small child had desperately tried to trace my handwriting from a distant memory. The ink loops were completely wrong. The pen pressure was wildly uneven. The slant of the letters was completely unnatural. But the fake signature was not the part that was about to completely destroy Thaddeus. Veda raised a perfectly manicured finger. She pointed directly at the bottom right corner of the final page. "Notice the official notary stamp right here, Sheriff," Veda said, her voice dropping into a tone of clinical precision. "The commission expiration date clearly listed on that state stamp is from October of last year. Yet this document claims to have been officially notarized in February of this current year. Furthermore, I ran that specific notary identification number through the state licensing database this morning after my client informed me of the impending fraud." Veda paused, letting the silence stretch out for maximum impact. That specific notary passed away from a heart attack in November. The silence that followed her statement was absolute. Even the seagulls circling above the coastal cliffs seemed to stop making noise. Thaddeus swallowed incredibly hard. A thick purple vein began throbbing violently in the center of his forehead. "That is just a simple clerical error," Thaddeus stammered desperately. His confident, kingly facade was actively shattering into a million tiny pieces right before my eyes. "It is a minor technicality." "It is not a technicality, Thaddeus," Veda corrected him sharply. "It is felony forgery. And considering your son, Cale, has currently registered a fraudulent limited liability company at this exact address. And considering Cale has applied for a $150,000 commercial credit line using Vesper as a forged guarantor." Veda crossed her arms. "This badly forged lease looks exactly like a coordinated criminal conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud." Cale physically recoiled as if he had been punched in the chest. He stumbled backward, slamming heavily against the hood of the silver SUV. He looked completely green. He looked like he was going to vomit all over the gravel. "You told them." Cale hissed fiercely at his father. "You specifically promised me the LLC registration was totally invisible until we moved in." Thaddeus spun around, his face completely purple with blinding rage. "Shut your stupid mouth, Cale." Thaddeus roared at the top of his lungs. Odelia finally broke. She began to wail hysterically. She dropped the heavy, expensive potted orchid directly onto the concrete porch. The ornate ceramic pot shattered into dozens of sharp pieces. Dark, wet potting soil scattered everywhere, staining my pristine entryway. "Vesper, please." Odelia sobbed, falling to her knees in the dirt. "Do not let these people do this to us. We are your loving family. We just wanted to be close to you." I looked down at the shattered pot. I looked at the terrified, pathetic face of the brother who had actively tried to steal my entire future. And finally, I looked at the father who had treated me like nothing more than a disposable bank account my entire life. You did not want to be close to me, I said quietly, the truth ringing like a bell in the cold air. You just wanted to own me. Thaddeus turned his furious, bloodshot gaze back to me. You ungrateful, selfish brat. Thaddeus spat viciously. He pointed a violently trembling finger directly at my chest. We gave you absolutely everything. We raised you. We supported you when you were nothing. You owe us this massive house. You owe us every single penny of your success. I nodded very slowly. I turned my back on him for a brief second. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up the thick black folder, and walked right back to the doorway. I do owe you, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously soft whisper. So I did the exact math. I wanted to see exactly how much your toxic parenting cost me over the last 10 years. I opened the heavy black folder. Inside was the detailed, heavily highlighted financial summary of my entire adult life. Before I read it, I reached into my pocket and pressed a single button on my phone. It was a pre-scheduled command. With that one tap, an email containing all the evidence of Cale's fraud, the fake lease, and Lyra's attempt to steal the $850,000 offshore account was instantly sent to every single aunt, uncle, cousin, and business associate in our extended network. The media reveal was complete. Their pristine family reputation was officially dead. Let us review the numbers, I said, holding the folder up to the light. If you have watched the story up to this point, thank you so much for your time. Please leave a comment with the exact word story so I know you made it this far. I promise to heart and reply to every single comment with that keyword. Also, please do not forget to subscribe to Kiwi Revenge. Now, back to the ultimate financial execution. I held the thick stack of highlighted bank statements up so the deputies could clearly see them. But my eyes were locked dead onto my father. When Cale completely maxed out his credit cards on a fake dropshipping business, I paid the $20,000 settlement to keep the collection agencies from ruining your house, I read aloud, my voice ringing out clearly. When your own consulting business failed because you aggressively refused to pay your private contractors, I gave you a $30,000 emergency bridge loan. You swore on your life you would repay it. You never paid back a single, solitary cent. I flipped the page, the sound of the crisp paper cutting through the silence. When Lyra decided she wanted to be an influencer, Odelia stole a medical power of attorney to try and drain my $850,000 retirement fund. I have paid your property tax shortages. I have paid your incredibly high auto insurance premiums. I have paid for Odelia to go on 3 separate luxury cruises to relieve her minor stress while I worked 80-hour weeks and ate instant noodles. I looked up from the papers, my eyes burning with years of suppressed anger. The grand total amount of money I have transferred to this parasitic family since I turned 18 is exactly $120,000. Thaddeus stared blankly at the highly detailed documents. His mouth was opening and closing rapidly like a fish suffocating on dry land. So, do not stand on my property and dare to tell me I owe you absolutely anything, I continued. The cold anger finally bled heavily into my words. I bought you out. I paid my ransom in full. I owe you nothing. Cale was shaking his head rapidly side to side. Vesper, come on, please, Cale begged, his voice cracking pitifully. The business loan application was just a temporary placeholder. I was going to switch the primary guarantor name to mine as soon as the rental revenue started officially coming in. We already have $45,000 in confirmed bookings. You took $45,000 from innocent people for a property you do not even own, Beta interjected, stepping up right beside me. The luxury rental platform has already been fully notified by my office. They're actively freezing your host account and initiating massive chargebacks to the victims. Your LLC is effectively bankrupt as of an hour ago. And the commercial bank has completely flagged your loan application for a federal fraud investigation. Odelia let out a loud, theatrical, gut-wrenching sob. She collapsed backward against the side of the silver SUV, heavily clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Thaddeus, do something. Odelia cried out hysterically. She is completely ruining us. Thaddeus took one heavily menacing step toward the porch. His large fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were completely white. I will utterly destroy you, Vesper, Thaddeus growled. I will tell absolutely everyone in the family what you did to us today. I will make sure you never show your face at another family gathering for the rest of your miserable life. Sheriff Evander stepped directly into Thaddeus's path. He rested his large hand firmly on the heavy grip of his service weapon. Sir, I am going to politely ask you to step backward toward your vehicle, the sheriff said. His voice dropped into a register that demanded absolute, immediate compliance. You have been formally served a verbal notice of trespass by the homeowner. You are currently under active suspicion for presenting forged legal documents to a sworn officer. If you take one more aggressive step toward this house, I will put you in steel handcuffs and you will leave this mountain in the back of my cruiser. Do you completely understand me? Thaddeus froze. He looked at the towering sheriff. Then he looked back at me. The absolute, unbridled hatred in his eyes was truly chilling, but his intense fear of going to prison was much stronger. The ultimate family bully had finally met a solid brick wall he could not punch his way through. Slowly, Thaddeus backed away. He turned toward the two paid movers. They had been standing completely silent by the large truck the entire time, their eyes wide with shock. Get back in the damn truck. Thaddeus barked furiously at them. We are leaving. The movers did not need to be told twice. They practically sprinted up the metal ramp and slammed the heavy door shut behind them. Cale scrambled frantically into the passenger seat of the SUV. He pulled his designer sunglasses down to completely hide his crying face. Thaddeus practically dragged a sobbing Odelia off the asphalt and shoved her roughly into the back seat. I watched silently as Thaddeus started the engine. He rolled down the window and pointed a shaking finger at me one last time. This is not over, Vesper. Yes, it is, I replied. I reached into the back pocket of my slacks. I pulled out a pair of sharp metal scissors. I held up the heavy plastic emergency family credit card that I had kept active for them for the last 8 years. I held it right in front of his face. I cut the plastic card directly in half. I let the 2 broken pieces fall onto the dirt next to the shattered orchid pot. Get off my land, I said softly. The SUV threw heavy gravel into the misty air as it reversed violently out of my long driveway. It was followed closely by the massive, groaning moving truck. I stood perfectly still on the front porch. I watched until the bright red tail lights completely disappeared around the coastal bend. The beautiful silence of the ocean returned. But this time, it felt entirely different. It felt like absolute victory. The peaceful silence lasted exactly 12 hours before the severe desperation took a much darker turn. By late afternoon, my phone began vibrating continuously. The flying monkeys had been deployed. During their long drive back down the coast, Thaddeus and Odelia had furiously spun a narrative of ultimate betrayal to our relatives. They painted themselves as frail, deeply loving parents who had traveled for hours just to bring me a beautiful housewarming gift. They claimed they were brutally ambushed by corrupt police and kicked out onto the street by their greedy, ungrateful, sociopathic daughter. I had 42 missed calls. I had dozens of angry text messages from cousins and aunts calling me a corporate monster. But I did not panic. I knew the mass email I had scheduled to send would take a few hours for everyone to actually sit down and read. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the angry messages completely stopped. The silence in the extended family group chat became deafening. The undeniable PDF attachments of Cale's fraud, the fake lease, and Lyra's attempt to steal my offshore trust fund had shattered Thaddeus's victim narrative into a million pieces. My Aunt Cressida, who had previously called me a monster, texted me a massive apology. She had just realized that Cale had secretly borrowed $5,000 from her under the guise of an investment, and she was never getting it back. The family was not just mad at them. They were actively organizing to sue Cale for previous unpaid debts. The financial walls were rapidly caving in on my father. And Thaddeus was simply not the kind of man to lose with any grace. At exactly 2:15 in the morning, my phone emitted a piercing, high-pitched siren sound. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. It was the critical alert tone from my exterior AI security cameras. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and stared at the glowing screen. The notification clearly read, Motion detected. Main gate electrical box. I opened the live night vision video feed. For a moment, all I saw was the wind violently blowing through the coastal trees. Then, a dark figure stepped out from the heavy tree line. It was Thaddeus. He was wearing a dark hooded jacket, but his aggressive, lumbering posture was unmistakable. He was creeping toward the heavy utility box that supplied main power to the entire mansion. In his hands, he held a massive pair of industrial steel bolt cutters. My blood ran instantly cold. He had driven 3 hours back up the coast in the dead of night. He was no longer trying to use fake legal loopholes. He was actively resorting to property vandalism and physical intimidation. He was planning to cut the main electrical feed to plunge me into total darkness and terrorize me. I did not shout through the two-way camera speaker. I did not want to scare him off. I wanted him permanently caught. I dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up instantly. I gave my address and stated that an intruder with a heavy cutting tool was actively trying to breach my electrical panel. I kept the phone pressed tightly to my ear as I watched the screen. Thaddeus clamped the heavy metal jaws of the bolt cutters over the thick padlock securing the power box. He strained violently, throwing his entire body weight onto the handles. The lock snapped loudly. He tossed the broken metal aside and reached for the thick rubber cables inside. Suddenly, the entire driveway was flooded with blinding red and blue strobe lights. 2 county sheriff cruisers came tearing up the dark access road, their tires sliding wildly on the wet gravel. Thaddeus froze like a terrified deer in headlights. The deputies were out of their vehicles in a fraction of a second. They shined their blinding tactical flashlights directly into the camera feed. Their weapons were fully drawn. "Drop the tool right now," the officers shouted. "Get on the ground. Do it now." Thaddeus dropped the heavy bolt cutters onto the gravel. He raised his shaking hands in the air, trying to slowly back away into the trees. A large deputy grabbed him roughly by the shoulder, spun him around, and forced him aggressively against the hood of the cruiser. The sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed clearly through the camera's microphone. I walked downstairs, turned on the massive floodlights, and stepped outside. I watched closely as they shoved my father into the back of the police car. He looked at me through the wire mesh of the window. His eyes were wild and desperate. But he said absolutely nothing. He was utterly and permanently defeated. The fallout was rapid and absolutely devastating. Because of the massive fraud investigations, Cale was officially banned from every financial platform. Aunt Cressida and 3 other relatives filed a joint lawsuit against him for previous unpaid loans. Cale was forced to declare total personal bankruptcy. The golden child ended up taking a minimum wage job working the grueling night shift at a logistics warehouse. It was the exact kind of manual labor he used to relentlessly mock me for managing. Without my silent financial support, Thaddeus and Odelia completely defaulted on their own mortgage. They lost the large suburban house they had lived in for 30 years. They were forced to sell off most of their remaining furniture just to afford a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. The ironic justice was beautifully poetic. They had tried to use my house to fund a fraudulent empire. In doing so, they had triggered the exact investigations that exposed their entire house of cards. 6 full months passed. The sprawling mansion transformed from an active battleground back into the peaceful sanctuary it was always meant to be. I converted the downstairs room that Cale had tried to violently claim into a beautiful home office for my new consulting business. I took on only a few select, high-paying clients. I helped small manufacturers rebuild their failing supply chains. I made slightly less money than I did in the corporate world, but I slept a full 8 hours every single night. I bought a large rescue dog, a beautiful golden retriever mix named Jasper. I spent my quiet evenings throwing a tennis ball off the back deck into the crashing waves. The profound silence of the coast was no longer a reminder of the tense quiet before a storm. It was just pure, unadulterated peace. Aunt Cressida actually visited me in the early fall. I paid for her to stay at a lovely, quiet bed and breakfast in the nearby coastal town. We had a wonderful dinner on my back porch, watching the sun slowly set over the Pacific Ocean. She told me all about her ongoing lawsuit. She explained how she was slowly recovering her stolen funds by legally garnishing Kale's meager warehouse wages. She did not ask me to forgive them. She did not try to guilt-trip me. She just held my hand across the table and told me she was incredibly proud of the beautiful life I had built for myself. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon in late November, the local mail carrier drove up my private road. He handed me a small, badly battered cardboard box. There was absolutely no return address on the label. I took the box inside and set it down on the kitchen island. Jasper sniffed it very curiously. I grabbed a sharp utility knife and sliced cleanly through the packing tape. Inside, wrapped tightly in a faded piece of newspaper, was a heavy metal object. I slowly pulled it out. It was a rusty, ancient set of bicycle keys attached to a faded plastic tag. They were the exact keys to the bright red mountain bike I had bought when I was 12 years old. The same bike Thaddeus had stolen and sold to buy Kale a laptop. At the very bottom of the box was a single, crumpled piece of lined paper. The handwriting clearly belonged to Odelia. It was shaky, uneven, and stained with dried tears. The note simply read, "We found these in a drawer while packing for the new apartment. You were right about everything. It was always yours. We are so incredibly sorry, Vesper. Please, just call us." I stared at the rusty keys for a very long time. The metal was freezing cold against the palm of my hand. A younger, more fragile version of me would have seen this package as a massive, world-altering victory. She would have seen it as the ultimate apology. She would have viewed it as the tiny crack in the armor that proved they really did love me deep down inside. That younger girl would have picked up the phone, broken the permanent restraining order, and invited them right back into her life. She would have desperately hoped that this time, things would finally be different. But the strong, independent woman standing in the kitchen of the $3 million mansion knew infinitely better. An apology heavily driven by sheer financial desperation is not real remorse. It is just a different, more pathetic negotiation tactic. They were currently living in a cramped, terrible apartment. They were drowning in massive debt. They were completely alienated from the rest of the extended family. They were not genuinely sorry for what they did to me. They were only sorry that their manipulation no longer worked. They missed the financial benefits of my existence, not me as a daughter. I walked slowly over to the massive stone fireplace in the center of the living room. I placed the rusty bicycle keys directly onto the wooden mantel. I set them right next to a beautiful framed photo of Jasper and me sitting by the ocean. I did not put those keys there as a symbol of forgiveness. I put them there as a permanent monument. They were a daily, physical reminder of exactly what it costs to let toxic, parasitic people cross your established boundaries. They were a silent promise to myself that I would never, ever let it happen again. My home is my impenetrable fortress. The heavy steel doors are locked. The high-definition cameras are always on. And the person living inside is finally safe. People often ask me if I will ever let them meet my future husband or the children I might have one day. They constantly ask if keeping this iron boundary is too cruel and unusual for a family to endure. My answer to them is always exactly the same. Forgiveness is something you do internally to release your own heavy anger. It absolutely does not require granting physical access to the people who intentionally harmed you. I can forgive them from a massive distance, safely behind a locked door they will never possess the key to open. Was I too ruthless for letting my own parents and siblings fall into total financial ruin when I could have easily saved them? Should I have paid Kale's massive debts one last time just to save them from poverty? Let me know your final verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more just like it, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every single like and comment helps us bring more satisfying stories to you. Thank you so much for watching, and always remember to protect your peace.